Today is Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the results of my IVF cycle and break down the numbers for you because, after all, it really is a numbers game, but it may not make a lot of sense until someone explains why. My numbers were great, and then not so great, and then great again. But despite this, I still plan to do a second cycle, being the risk-averse person that I am. The inverted pyramid. Here's the pyramid I got at the Men Having Babies conference. It's meant to show you how the number of follicles and eggs your donor starts with eventually get whittled down to some much smaller number. So in the end, your goal is to start with as many eggs as possible. I'm going to focus on the middle column because with one sperm source, that clearly applies to me. As you can see, you start with the number of follicles at the top and end with euploids at the bottom. My starting numbers were very similar to these, as were my ending numbers, but in between, I was not getting results as good as these. Let's talk about my numbers. Recall that my egg donor organization, Cofertility, does not operate the way most others do. With most agencies, the intended parent compensates the egg donor for her participation, and this can range anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 or more. The cheapest place to get an egg donor is your fertility clinic. At mine, the compensation was only $7,000 and could never exceed $11,000, no matter how many times she donated. But the selection was tiny, and the only woman I wanted had an 18-month waiting period. My then number one choice I got from my surrogacy agency for maybe $10,000, but I was third in line, and after her first retrieval, she dropped out due to complications. Fast forward to Cofertility, where I went through 7 potential egg donors until I successfully matched with one in October 2024. She started the process in early April. I cannot explain exactly everything that happened, but suffice it to say that in a nutshell, she goes on birth control for a bit, gets an initial baseline reading, takes fertility drugs, has some more local monitoring, and then travels to Dallas for the planned egg retrieval. That happened on Thursday, April 24th, and went off without a hitch. The only follicle count I got was 29, but that was a few days before retrieval, so it must have gone up because they got more eggs than this. I think they measure and count only those that are 10 millimeters or larger. So they retrieved a whopping 33 eggs, but remember that I get only 50% of these. I got 17 because the intended parent gets the odd one. What happens next is a series of events that move your eggs and embryos forward as long as they meet the criteria. 15 of my eggs were mature, so they were fertilized. You cannot fertilize immature eggs, so I lost 2 here. But only 14 took, so I lost another 1. Which means I had 14 growing in the lab for the next 6 days. I actually thought to myself at this point, what am I going to do with 14 eggs? I really need only 3 per child. Well, I ended up not having this problem. I was told on day 3 that 8 were growing normally, but that 6 were a little behind. They were going to watch all 14 with the hope that these 6 would eventually catch up. Well, on day 6, they called to say that none of the 6 made it to where they needed to be. And of the normally progressing 8, only 4 were fully developed. My heart sank for a bit. How could I start with 17 and end up with only 4? And this wasn't even the end. The final step was PGT testing, or pre-implantation genetic testing, which takes 2 weeks. The purpose is to make sure all of the embryos have 23 sets of chromosomes and are normal in this respect. So then you wait with bated breath. And then I got the email on May 8th. Fantastic news, all 4 of them passed, which means 100% of my embryos were now classified as euploids, which is just a fancy word for chromosomally normal embryos. I had planned on a much worse outcome because based on her age, which is late 20s, on average, only 65% of them passed this test. So I expected at most 2 or less, but I got all 4. And I have 2 males and 2 females. Additionally, they grade the embryos. The first letter is for the embryo, the second is for the placenta, and the third is for the space between them. The second letter is the most important. Most embryos get B's and C's, with A's rare because that indicates perfection. One of my males got an A as the second letter, so he's in the best shape. Then I have a male and female that got the same grade, BBB, and then a female that got a B as her second letter, but a C as her first. Long story short, I now have 4 viable embryos. It's very interesting now looking back that at some point I seriously considered paying $20,000 for 6 eggs frozen because I thought having a known quantity was better than risking getting 5 or fewer eggs through a fresh cycle. But now that I see the numbers, I think 6 eggs might likely get you 0 euploids. The math just doesn't work, and this now looks much riskier. So what's next? Now I can proceed down the surrogacy part, which means signing a retainer with Simple Surrogacy in Dallas, paying them the retainer, and starting with what is expected to be a 6 to 9 month search for a surrogate. At the same time, I'm moving forward with scheduling a second IVF cycle while I still have fertility coverage through Progeny. I would really like twice as many embryos. The reason for that is I want 2 children, and it makes a lot more sense to do this now than find out a year from now when I have a surrogate that all 3 transfer attempts have failed and that I have only 1 embryo left. That would be horrible and require me to start over with a new surrogate and potentially a new egg donor if my current one is no longer interested. So I'm avoiding that by doing this now. It's not that much out of pocket, about $14,000 for the second cycle. Progeny pays roughly $22,000 for the medical part of it. By the way, ChatGPT is great at showing you what your kids might look like. I submitted a photo of me and one of my egg donor and asked it for a boy and a girl at ages 5, 10, 15, and 20. You'll see the results in the end of this video. It will probably be a few months before I record another one of these, and it will be either about the second IVF cycle or the process of matching with the surrogate. If you have any specific questions you want to run by me, feel free to comment or DM me on whatever platform you're watching this on. And thanks for watching.